breathing, blood flow getting shuttled to certain areas of the brain and body and not to others. It can create a hypervigilance or an awareness. Typically that awareness is narrower, literally narrower in space, like a soda straw view of the world, than when we are relaxed. And it is fair to say that we cannot have fear without having several, if not all, of the elements of the stress response. However, we can have stress without having fear. Likewise, people are familiar with the phrase, or the word rather, anxiety. Anxiety tends to be stress about some future event, although it can mean other things as well. We can't really have fear without seeing or observing or experiencing some of the elements of anxiety, but you can have anxiety without having fear. So what you're starting to realize is that fear is built up from certain basic elements that include stress and anxiety. And then there is trauma. And trauma also requires a specific, what we would call operational definition. An operational definition is just a definition that allows us to have a conversation because we both agree on, or mostly agree on, what the meaning of a given word is. It makes conversations much easier. In fact, I would argue if we all had operational definitions for more things in the world, that there would be fewer misunderstandings and arguments, and we'd all move a lot further as a species. But that's another topic entirely. The operational definition of trauma is that some fear took place, which of course includes stress and anxiety, and that fear somehow gets embedded or activated in our nervous system such that it shows up at times when it's maladaptive, meaning that fear doesn't serve us well and it gets reactivated at various times. Like when you first wake up in the morning, if you're not in the presence of something that scared you, but you suddenly have what feels like a panic attack and you're in deep fear, well, that's post-traumatic stress. That's post-traumatic fear. So I don't want to get bogged down too much in the nomenclature, but what I'm doing here is building up a sort of series of layers of stress and anxiety, inflammation, and trauma. And there are other phrases out there that would be remiss if we didn't mention, things like phobias and panic attacks. Panic attacks are the experience of extreme fear, but without any fear-inducing stimulus, so it's kind of like trauma. And a phobia tends to be extreme fear of something specific. Fear of spiders, fear of heights, fear of flying, fear of dying, these kinds of things, okay? The reason for laying all that out there is not to create a word soup to confuse us, rather it is to simplify the issue, because now that we acknowledge that there are many different phrases to describe this thing that we call fear and related phenomena, we can start to just focus on two of these issues, fear and trauma, as it relates to specific biological processes, specific cognitive processes, and we can start to dissect how fears are formed, how fears are unformed, and how new memories can come to replace the previously fearful experiences. So in this effort to establish a common language around fear and trauma, I want to point out autonomic arousal. Autonomic arousal relates to this aspect of our nervous system that we call the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic means automatic. That's somewhat of a misnomer because there are aspects of your autonomic nervous system that you can control, but your autonomic nervous system controls things like digestion, urination, sexual behavior, stress, when you want to be awake, when you want to be asleep. It basically has two branches to it, two branches meaning two different systems. One is the so-called sympathetic autonomic nervous system. It has nothing to do with sympathy. It has everything to do with increasing alertness. Think of the sympathetic nervous system as the alertness nervous system. It's what ramps up your levels of alertness, ramps up your levels of vigilance. Think about it as the accelerator on your alertness and attention. The other branch of the autonomic nervous system is the so-called parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. I know that's a mouthful. The parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system are the cells and neurons and chemicals and other aspects of your brain and body that are involved in the calming nervous system. So sympathetic is alerting, parasympathetic is calming, and it acts as sort of a seesaw to adjust your overall level of alertness. So for instance, right now, I'm alert, but I feel pretty calm. I'm not ready to go to sleep or anything like that. I don't feel like I need a nap. I'm alert, but I'm calm. I'm not in a state of stress or panic. So that seesaw we could imagine is more or less level. Maybe it's tilted up a little bit to the side of increased sympathetic or alertness rather than parasympathetic because I feel wide awake. If I were sleepy, the opposite would be true. The parasympathetic side would be increased relative to the sympathetic side. There are many different aspects to the autonomic nervous system, but one of the main aspects is an aspect that's going to come up again and again and again today. It's very important that you understand what it is. It's called an Hpa axis.
Last round.
Hpa axis stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The hypothalamus is a collection of neurons. It's an area of your brain, real estate, that's deep in the brain, at the base of the brain, that contains many, many different areas that control things like temperature and desire to have sex, desire to eat, thirst. It also controls the desire to not mate, have sex, not eat, not drink more water or any other type of fluid. So it has accelerators and brakes in there as well. The hypothalamus connects to the so-called pituitary. The pituitary lives close to the roof of your mouth. It releases hormones into your bloodstream. And so the hypothalamus has this ability to trigger the release or prevent the release of particular hormones like cortisol, or the hormones that go stimulate ovaries to produce estrogen, or testes to produce testosterone, or adrenals to produce adrenaline. And speaking of the adrenals, that A in the HPA,
Forearms
adrenals,
and the ankles are not
have two glands that sit above your kidneys and your lower back. They receive signals by way of nerve cells, neurons,